What if everything you thought you knew about ancient history is wrong? It sounds dramatic, but a wave of new discoveries is forcing experts to unlearn old assumptions about our past. For generations, textbooks neatly outlined humanity's rise from primitive hunter-gatherers to modern civilization. We assumed we knew the broad story. Yet recent evidence suggests there's a continent-sized gap in our knowledge, entire chapters of human history we've only begun to uncover. Consider the legend of Atlantis, a mythical advanced city swallowed by the sea. It's captivated imaginations for centuries, but it remains firmly a myth. The real story, however, is far more incredible than any legend. Around the world, archaeologists are finding traces of hidden civilizations that defy the conventional timeline. Sunken lands, prehistoric cities, and advanced cultures long lost to time are emerging from the dust and depths. These findings hint that our standard history, the one we all learned in school, might be missing some astonishing chapters. What hidden civilizations are only just now emerging from the dust? This is the essence of the Great Unlearning. We're discovering that humans in the distant past were far more capable and organized than we ever believed. Ancient people built monumental structures millennia earlier than expected. Entire societies thrived in areas long thought uninhabited. Even cataclysmic events, massive floods, rapid climate shifts, left ghostly imprints of civilizations we're only now starting to find. In this journey, we'll explore some of the most groundbreaking revelations. The Beringian breakthrough, evidence of a lost Ice Age land bridging Asia and America and the advanced peoples who lived there. The Göbekli Tepe paradox, how stunning Stone Age temples in Turkey like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are rewriting the origins of civilization. The underwater cities of the Black Sea, remains of prehistoric towns preserved beneath the sea, and what they tell us about ancient global floods. Future frontiers, how new technology, from satellites to artificial intelligence, is unearthing lost worlds in the Amazon rainforest and Arabian deserts, and why global collaboration is crucial to piece together our real history. By the end, one thing will be clear: the true wonders of our past are not just found, they are constantly being redefined. Our journey into ancient history has only just begun. Our first stop is Beringia, the vast land that once connected Siberia and Alaska during the Ice Age. For decades, the story of the Americas' settlement was simple. Around 13,000 years ago, small bands of Siberian hunters trudged across a frozen land bridge into an empty new world. They were presumed to be primitive nomads, barely eking out a living. But new discoveries on the floor of the Bering Sea are challenging that narrative in a big way. Researchers mapping the now submerged Bering land bridge have made a breakthrough. Using seismic imaging and underwater surveying, they uncovered evidence of a lost world, a Beringian transitory archipelago of islands and lowlands that existed from about 30,000 years ago until 8,000 years ago. During the last glacial maximum, when sea levels dropped, Beringia wasn't just a narrow ice corridor. It was a sprawling habitat the size of a continent. Imagine tundra plains, forests, and coastline rich with seafood stretching between Asia and North America. This wasn't a mere bridge crossed by people. It was a land where people could live for millennia. In fact, genetic studies have long hinted at a mystery. The ancestors of Native Americans appear to have been isolated from other Asians for up to 15,000 years before populating the Americas. This is known as the Beringian standstill hypothesis. For years, it was unclear where these people could have been. Stuck. Now the puzzle piece falls into place. Beringia itself was a refugium, a safe haven of dry land where a population could survive for thousands of years, isolated by glaciers. The new mapping of the Beringian archipelago shows how that was possible. Scores of temporary islands would have appeared and disappeared as sea levels fluctuated, acting like stepping stones eastward. Early hunter-gatherers could move from one island to the next, gradually reaching Alaska, all while remaining largely cut off from Asia. So what were these people like? Far from the stereotype of wandering nomads on the verge of survival, the evidence suggests the inhabitants of Beringia were adaptable and surprisingly advanced. Archaeologists have found advanced Paleolithic tools in areas on either side of the Bering Sea that likely reflect the technology of Beringia's lost communities. For example, in Siberia and Alaska, a sophisticated method of making stone blades, known as microblade technology, was in use by 25,000 years ago. Instead of crude rock flakes, these people made tiny razor-sharp blades from stone and mounted them in bone or wood handles. This tool innovation, which spread across Northeast Asia and into Beringia, shows planning and skill. Microblades allowed hunters to create light, lethal weapons, and to plan for future needs by producing standardized, replaceable blades. In other words, Ice Age people in this region had a kind of production economy for tools, a clear sign of cultural advancement. Not only did they have advanced tools, they likely had watercraft and maritime knowledge. Beringia's coastlines teemed with marine life, and researchers now think its people were adept coastal foragers and even boaters. Seaweed, fish, and shellfish remains found in ancient Alaskan sites suggest a maritime diet. One can easily imagine Beringians paddling skin boats along the shores, much like the Inuit with their kayaks. In fact, some archaeological clues indicate maritime peoples were present in nearby Japan and the Kuril Islands as early as 27,000 years ago. Those skills could well have been shared by Beringia's inhabitants. Perhaps most astonishing, there are hints that Beringians weren't just small bands on the move. They may have formed communal settlements. While much of Beringia's archaeological record is now underwater, making it hard to excavate actual villages, indirect evidence is tantalizing. Genetic studies imply a sustained, somewhat stable population in Beringia for many generations, suggesting they weren't continually roaming, but often staying in particular areas where resources were plentiful. We know that by the end of the Ice Age, people across the Arctic built substantial dwellings. For instance, archaeological sites in Siberia and Eastern Europe have revealed large huts built from mammoth bones dated to 15,000–25,000 years ago. One recently discovered circular structure in Russia, 40 feet across, and constructed from the bones of at least 60 mammoths, is a jaw-dropping example of Ice Age engineering. Fires burned inside it, and pits for food storage were found just outside, suggesting a semi-permanent camp where people gathered and prepared food in large quantities. If such ambitious structures were built on the plains of Ukraine and Siberia 25 millennia ago, it's quite plausible that Beringia's people also built substantial shelters or even communal meeting houses using wood, bones, and earth. After all, Beringia during the Ice Age wasn't an empty ice sheet. Parts of it were relatively mild parkland with trees and rivers. Recent underwater surveys give us further hints. Marine archaeologists, probing the shallow seabed of the Bering Strait, have identified what appear to be drowned river valleys and even lake beds with anomalous features, possible human artifacts or settlement debris. In one case, researchers reported sonar images that could indicate stone tools or hearthstones on an ancient paleo-coastal terrace beneath the Chukchi Sea. These findings are still preliminary, but they fit the idea that as the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age, many coastal campsites and villages would have been submerged. Locking away. Proof of these people's lifestyles. It's a sobering thought. Huge swaths of the archaeological record, from Beringia and elsewhere, now lie beneath the ocean, out of reach for now. Crucially, scattered discoveries in the Americas themselves are starting to rewrite the timeline of migration. For example, in Yukon Territory of Canada, the Bluefish Cave site yielded animal bones with cut marks, showing humans were butchering animals there around 24,000 years ago. That is a full 10,000 years earlier than the long-held Clovis First theory had assumed humans in North America. The Bluefish Cave's evidence suggests that a group of people, likely those Beringian standstill folks, were present in North America during the height of the Ice Age, surviving in a refugium just south of the ice sheets. If so, they must have come through Beringia even earlier, implying that parts of Beringia were inhabited well before 20,000 years ago. In support of this, tools from the Yana River site in Siberia show humans living above the Arctic Circle 32,000 years ago. It's not a stretch to imagine that some of those hardy pioneers ventured east onto Beringian lands shortly after. All this is challenging the old picture of the first Americans. Instead of a brief, hasty migration by unsophisticated hunters, we now envision a prolonged saga. Ice Age explorers gradually colonizing a fertile lost continent, Beringia, thriving there for millennia, developing unique tools and habits, and then moving en masse into the Americas when the climate warmed. These people weren't primitive nomads. They were adaptable survivors, maybe even stewards of their environment. They harvested both land and sea, possibly managed game herds, and sheltered in sizable structures during the brutal glacial winters. They may have had rich oral traditions and social networks stretching across the islands and coasts of their world. The implications are huge. It means complex society in the Americas might have started earlier than we thought, not with the agricultural villages of 5000 BC, but with these Ice Age foraging societies that organized large hunts, built enduring dwellings, and perhaps traded tool-making knowledge across vast distances. It suggests that the true age of organized society in the New World isn't 5,000 years, but maybe 15,000 or 20,000 years, or more. As researchers like to say, we've only found the low-hanging fruit so far. The real proof, actual archaeological sites of Beringian camps or dwellings, remains underwater, awaiting discovery. Projects are underway to map submerged landscapes, guided by predictive models of where coastlines use Toby. Scientists are literally hunting for lost islands and paleo riverbanks on the seafloor, looking for the kind of places people would have camped, near freshwater springs, river confluences, or estuaries rich in fish. It's a high-tech treasure hunt. Every summer, for a brief window when the Arctic weather allows, teams deploy advanced sonar, submersible drones, and even divers in the Bering and Chukchi seas. Finding an actual 15,000-year-old village on the seabed would be a historic discovery. But even without that smoking gun, the circumstantial evidence has grown compelling. We now have to accept that Ice Age humans were far more resourceful and settled than previously believed. They braved harsh climates, mastered new technologies, and perhaps even formed societies that were complex in their own ways. The story of Beringia teaches us that humans have been adapting to dramatic climate change, such as rising seas, since time immemorial. When the glaciers melted and Beringia slowly vanished under the waves, those people didn't vanish. They moved. They became the first Americans, spreading genetic and cultural legacies that would flourish into the myriad indigenous peoples of the Americas. It's humbling to realize that entire chapters of that epic tale lie hidden underwater. We're only now glimpsing that lost world. As one scientist put it, whatever you learned in school about how and when humans spread around the globe is likely wrong, or at least incomplete. The Beringian breakthrough is giving us a new starting point for the human saga in the Western Hemisphere, one that adds thousands of years and a great deal more complexity to the story. Travel with me now from the depths of the Bering Sea to the rolling plains of southeastern Turkey, where a different kind of revelation was unearthed, one that overturned our understanding of the birth of civilization. This is the story of Göbekli Tepe and its sister site Karahan Tepe, a tale so surprising that archaeologists have dubbed it the Göbekli Tepe paradox. It's a paradox because thesis sites shouldn't exist, not according to the old textbooks. And yet, here they are. Majestic stone circles, T-shaped pillars carved with animals, and evidence of organized society at a time long before anyone thought humans could build monuments. Göbekli Tepe first entered the world's consciousness in the mid-1990s, when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating a mysterious hilltop in Turkey's Şanlıurfa province. What he revealed was astounding. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, some weighing 10-20 tons, richly carved with lions, bulls, foxes, snakes, and abstract symbols. The site was promptly dated to around 9600 BC. That's about 11,600 years ago, smack in the Stone Age, before pottery, before writing, and crucially, before agriculture or domesticated animals. Yet, here were these people, clearly capable of quarrying, carving, and transporting huge stones and assembling them into what looked like temples or communal sanctuaries. Göbekli Tepe was dubbed the world's oldest temple and caused an academic firestorm. How could hunter-gatherers, supposedly living in small nomadic bands, build something so monumental? For context, the conventional view had been that humans only started building temples and cities after we invented farming. This was the narrative of the Neolithic Revolution. First came agriculture, around 8,000–7,000 BC in the Near East, which led to food surplus, which allowed larger populations and sedentary villages, which eventually led to complex religion and architecture. Göbekli Tepe turned this idea on its head. Here was a complex of stone enclosures, centuries, if not millennia, older than the advent of farming. Its builders, as far as we know, were still hunter-gatherers. They hadn't domesticated wheat or animals yet. And yet they settled, at least seasonally, in this location, and marshaled the labor of possibly hundreds of people to carve and erect gigantic pillars. This paradox forced a profound rethink. Did monumental architecture come first and agriculture second? Were these hunter-gatherers actually so organized that they could inspire or necessitate the invention of farming? For a while, Göbekli Tepe stood alone as a singular marvel, a one-off proto-temple in the wilderness, perhaps a pilgrimage site where scattered bands met to worship or feast. But in recent years, that picture has evolved. Archaeologists began exploring other hills in the same region, an area now called the Taş Tepeler, meaning stone hills. What they found is that Göbekli Tepe was not unique at all. It was part of a whole constellation of prehistoric sites. The most notable of these is Karahan Tepe, about 35 kilometers away. Excavations at Karahan Tepe have yielded structures and artifacts on par with Göbekli Tepe's magnificence. In fact, Turkish researchers announced that Karahan Tepe contains a large oval, building with pillars and even stone, sculptures, including an incredible life-sized, carved human statue over 2 meters tall, and they've dated this site to around 11,400 years ago, 9400 BC. That makes Karahan Tepe roughly contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, if not slightly older by a couple of centuries. The findings at Karahan Tepe deepened the paradox. Not only were prehistoric people building one temple, they were building many of them across the region. And here's the kicker. At Karahan Tepe, they found evidence of houses, actual domestic buildings, right alongside the ritual structures. In other words, this wasn't just a ceremonial gathering spot. People lived here year-round. Turkish archaeologist Necmi Karul, who leads the Karahan excavations, calls it one of the world's oldest villages. There are small rooms, hearths, and even areas that look like they were used as quarries to extract bedrock for the pillars. Karul's team found no trace of cultivated grains or farmed animals at the site. The villagers were apparently still foraging and hunting wild game, yet they were living in permanent houses and constructing massive communal structures for ceremonies. This flips the traditional story completely. As Karul himself put it, settled life begins when humans were still hunter-gatherers, and agriculture is not a cause, but the effect of settled life. Let that sink in. These people built permanent villages and elaborate ritual centers before farming, perhaps their very lifestyle, organizing large groups to build and worship, created pressures or inspirations that led them to start cultivating plants and herding animals. It's a hypothesis now gaining traction that the social complexity evident at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe actually spurred the Neolithic agricultural revolution rather than resulted from it. The temples first, farms later idea is a radical departure from decades of thinking. The so-called Göbekli Tepe paradox can be summarized like this. How could a supposedly primitive society, lacking the benefits of agriculture, have the resources and coordination to produce such monumental architecture? The answers are still being pieced together, but archaeologists have some clues. First, the region was a hotspot of natural abundance at the end of the Ice Age. This area of Turkey is part of the Fertile Crescent. Wild wheat and barley grew on the hills, and wild game was plentiful in the lush, post-glacial environment. Groups could gather here seasonally to harvest grain and hunt gazelles en masse. So perhaps food was abundant enough, even without formal farming, to support a large workforce for part of the year. Second, the very act of building these monuments might have been a social glue that bound people together. Researchers theorize that different clans or bands met at Göbekli Tepe for ritual, feasting. Excavations have indeed found vast numbers of animal bones, mostly gazelle, and even large stone basins, presumably, used for brewing some kind of beer from wild grains. So picture large feasts, hundreds of people coming together for ceremonies, consuming roasted meat, and some primitive beer or porridge, celebrating shared myths or deities carved into the stones. This required organization, someone to plan the feast, coordinate the hunts, someone to direct the building of pillars, etc. In a way, these sites are the blueprints of society forming. People may have come as pilgrims or seasonal workers, and through the process of working and feasting together, they formed a shared culture and identity. That could be a precursor to more permanent settlement and agriculture. Karahan Tepe adds more intriguing pieces to the puzzle. One structure at Karahan, sometimes nicknamed the Cult Room, features a series of phallus-shaped pillars carved out of the bedrock. with an eerie sculpture of a human head emerging from a wall, clearly a special symbolic chamber. This suggests a complex ritual life with possibly shamanistic or spiritual practices we can only guess at. Moreover, at both Karahan and Göbekli, the art shows a consistent symbolic language. The T-shaped pillars are thought to be stylized human figures, possibly ancestors or deities, often wearing carvings of belts and loincloths. They stand among reliefs of animals, predators like lions and snakes, prey like deer and boars, birds and insects, perhaps representing a cosmology where humans and animals had spiritual connections. The repetition of motifs across sites indicates these early societies shared a religious or cultural framework over a wide region. This shared ritualistic motif is exactly what scientists now realize. Early hunter-gatherers did have complex belief systems and did coordinate on large-scale projects. We can no longer view them as simple or unsophisticated. Another traditional assumption that Göbekli Tepe shattered is the idea that division of labor and social hierarchy came only after farming produced surplus food. To carve and erect a 15-ton stone pillar, clearly some people had to specialize. Some became skilled stone carvers, others organizers, or spiritual leaders directing the effort. Others provisioned the workers with food and tools. We're looking at a society with specialization and cooperation long before formal civilization. It might not have kings or writing, but it had the seeds of later societal structures: skilled artisans, religious elites or shamans, and a coordinated workforce. And yet, they were all still essentially hunter-gatherers. This is why academics were initially skeptical. It defied the models. But the mounting evidence cannot be denied. Stone Age people built permanent structures for spiritual purposes, implying they had a large-scale society with division of labor much earlier than assumed. Both Göbekli and Karahan Tepe were ultimately deliberately buried by the people who built them centuries later, preserved under mounds of dirt until rediscovered in modern times. Why they buried these sites is still debated, perhaps ritual closure or the end of their use as sites when society was changing. Ironically, that burial preserved them beautifully for us to find. The paradox now has a proposed resolution. Maybe it wasn't a paradox at all, just our timeline was wrong. Perhaps sedentary life and spiritual monumentalism preceded agriculture. Then agriculture arose as an adaptation to support and sustain these settled communities. In essence, culture-led and cultivation followed. This has prompted a profound adjustment in archaeological thinking. Textbooks are being rewritten to explain that organized religion or ritual may have been a prime mover in humanity's shift to a new way of life. For a wider audience, what does this mean? It means when you think of the first villages or the first temples, you shouldn't picture early farmers. You should picture the end of the Ice Age, bands of hunter-gatherers coming together to build something bigger than themselves. It's a bit like finding a medieval cathedral built by cavemen. That's how revolutionary it seemed at first. But now we see those cavemen had already ceased being nomadic wanderers. They were proto-citizens of proto-cities, experimenting with architecture and social structure. To highlight how incredibly early this was, Göbekli Tepe's stone circles date to about 11,600 years ago, which is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge in England and 7,000 years older than the Egyptian pyramids. In fact, from our perspective today, Göbekli Tepe is closer in time to the last ice age than it is to the building of the pyramids. That's how far back in time these societies go. It's mind-boggling. If ancient Egypt feels old, Göbekli Tepe is twice that age. And it changes the question from when did civilization begin to what exactly is civilization? If by that we mean urban living with writing, then no, these sites aren't that. But if we mean living in communities, building monumental structures, practicing organized religion and art, then civilization in some form began here, in the Stone Age's sanctuaries of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. The story is still unfolding. Excavations continue at Karahan Tepe. Only a small fraction of it has been dug so far, similar to Göbekli, which still has many unexcavated features. In addition, more sites in the Taş Tepeler network are under investigation. Places like Sefer Tepe, Hamzan Tepe, and others that might reveal even more about this era. Every new find feeds into the overarching question: how did these early humans pull this off? Was there a central authority, or was it a communal effort? Did it indeed catalyze the invention of farming, perhaps to provide more reliable food for temple builders? Or were they able to do it with the rich wild resources alone? What we do know is that these discoveries represent a great unlearning of what we thought about the Neolithic Revolution. The tidy sequence of first agriculture, then cities, then religion no longer holds. Instead, human social ingenuity, our capacity to imagine myths, to cooperate in large groups, to plan ahead and shape our environment, may have been the spark that lit the flame of civilization. As owner-researcher noted, Stone Age people were building permanent settlements long before the advent of agriculture, overturning the old idea that farming was the prerequisite for settled life. It's more likely that spiritual and social needs prompted people to settle, which in turn led them to domesticate plants and animals as a necessity. In summary, the Göbekli Tepe paradox isn't a paradox anymore. It's evidence that human complexity predates farming. We had the curiosity, creativity, and social organization to erect great stone monuments while still living off wild foods. The builders of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe invite us to imagine our ancestors, not as mere survivors of a harsh world, but as visionaries and pioneers who, in a very real sense, built the stage upon which the drama of civilization would later unfold. Our journey of ancient revelations now takes a plunge, quite literally, into the depths of the Black Sea. Here, beneath the calm blue waters off the coasts of Bulgaria and Turkey, lie the remains of prehistoric settlements so well preserved that they've been called time capsules of early civilization. These are the underwater cities of the Black Sea, villages and habitations from thousands of years ago that were drowned by rising waters. Their discovery is not only astonishing on its own merits, but it also ties into some of humanity's oldest stories, legends of great floods that wiped out entire communities. As we explore these submerged sites, we confront the catastrophic power of nature and how it shaped and erased chapters of human history, hinting at global events that ancient people may have witnessed and remembered in myth. First, a bit of background. The Black Sea hasn't always been the sea we know today. During the last ice age, when global sea levels were lower, the Black Sea was a smaller, landlocked freshwater lake. But as the ice caps melted around 10,000, 8,000 years ago, water from the rising oceans breached into the Black Sea basin, through what are now the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. This influx turned the lake into a saltwater sea and dramatically raised its level. There has been debate on whether this was a gradual rise or a sudden catastrophic flood. An earlier hypothesis, the Noah's Flood hypothesis by Ryan and Pittman, suggested that around 5600 BC, the Mediterranean burst into the Black Sea with colossal force, raising the water level hundreds of feet in a short time, potentially inspiring flood myths like Noah's Ark or the story of Atlantis. Newer research, including a recent large-scale underwater project, indicates the transition might have been more gradual between 16,000 and 10,000 BC. Either way, the end result was the same. Vast stretches of what had been fertile coastal plains and inhabited shores were submerged. Any human settlements along the old lakeshore would have been flooded and lost beneath the waves. For a long time, these drowned landscapes were beyond our reach. But with advances in underwater archaeology, that's changed dramatically. Between 2015 and 2018, an ambitious research endeavor called the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, Black Sea Map, undertook extensive surveys of Bulgaria's Black Sea waters. Equipped with high-tech sonar, remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and even deep-sea submersibles, this international team mapped the seafloor in great detail. They made headlines for discovering incredibly well-preserved ancient shipwrecks, including a 2,400-year-old Greek merchant ship intact with mast and rudders, thanks to the Black Sea's anoxic, oxygen-free, deep waters which prevent decay. But for our story, the key finds weren't ships. They were the traces of Stone Age and Bronze Age settlements on the submerged landscape of the Black Sea's continental shelf. One of the most remarkable discoveries was the remains of a Bronze Age village off the Bulgarian coast, near the mouth of the Ropotamo River, at a depth of about 2.5 meters below the seafloor, which itself is under tens of meters of water. Archaeologists found evidence of human habitation, wooden house timbers, hearths, and pottery shards preserved in the mud. Radiocarbon dating and artifact styles indicate this settlement dates to the early Bronze Age, roughly around 3000 BC. At that time, The site would have been on the coast or slightly inland, a village near a river, close to lagoon or bay. As the post-ice age sea level rise continued, the area was inundated and the villagers had to abandon their homes. The Black Sea Map team confirmed that as the waters rose, this community was abandoned and ultimately submerged. Essentially, the valley they lived in turned it into an underwater bay, and later into open sea. Think about what this means. An actual human village, with houses and fireplaces from 5,000 years ago, is sitting on the seafloor, untouched except by marine incrustation. It's an underwater Pompeii of the prehistoric era. Divers and ROVs documented upright wooden posts, likely the remains of pile dwellings, houses on stilts or anchored frames, and sediment cores brought up charred grains and wood from ancient hearths. The anoxic conditions of deeper layers have kept even organic remains from rotting. It's eerie to imagine a small Chalcolithic or Bronze Age community going about their lives, and then over a generation or two, realizing the water is encroaching year by year, until one day they gather what they can and move to higher ground, leaving their village to the flood. And that's not an isolated case. Along the western Black Sea coast, modern-day Bulgaria and Romania, at least 18 submerged prehistoric settlement sites have been identified. Many date to the Chalcolithic Eneolithic period, about 4500–4200 BC, and others to the early Bronze Age, around 3000 BC. This corresponds to the window when the Black Sea level was stabilizing near its current state. In some spots, archaeologists found traces that these were terrestrial villages that got flooded and were quickly abandoned. In other spots, it appears people adapted by building wetland settlements, akin to the famous lake villages of Switzerland or pile dwellings in Italy, with houses on stilts or platforms over shallow water. Remains of such pile dwelling architecture have been discovered under the sea at places like Sozopol Harbor and the Varna Lakes in Bulgaria. That means people were already experimenting with living in aquatic environments, hammering wooden posts into marshy ground to support homes. Why were they doing this? Possibly because the environment was very rich. These lagoon and wetland areas offered abundant fish, shellfish, waterfowl, reeds for thatching, and fertile soils for early farming. In fact, some of the submerged sites contain the oldest evidence of cultivated crops and domestic animal bones in that region, indicating that these were among the earliest farming communities on the Black Sea coast. They likely traded and interacted with contemporaries further inland. The famous Varna culture, around 4600–4200 BC, known for the world's oldest gold treasure found in graves, was based just inland from the coast. One wonders if some of those Varna culture people had cousins living in the coastal wetland villages that are now underwater. One particularly evocative aspect of these underwater finds is how well preserved some items are. In the mud of the Black Sea seafloor, especially below the oxygenated layer, wood and even textiles can survive for millennia. Marine archaeologists have recovered sections of wattle, woven wood, from house walls, remnants of wooden doors, and pottery that sat undisturbed since the day it fell into the water. In some cases, entire prehistoric landscapes are visible, former river channels, drowned riverbanks with freshwater snail shells, even ancient soil layers with pollen that tell us what the environment was like. It's like a snapshot of a moment in time, the day before the flood. The implications of ancient floods here are profound. It's easy to see how a massive and memorable event it would be for those who lived through it. If the deluge was relatively rapid, even if not as sudden as earlier theories, it could have still been within a few years or decades. Imagine the trauma and astonishment. The sea, which had been distant, suddenly rushing in to swallow fields and houses. Oral histories of such a cataclysm could be passed down for generations, possibly evolving into legends of Agreed flood sent by the gods. While we cannot directly link the Black Sea flooding to the biblical Noah story, that remains speculative. It is a fascinating coincidence that one of the largest post-glacial flood events in human habitation zones happened right in a region later rich in flood myths. At minimum, we know that entire human communities were erased by rising waters, their existence forgotten until modern science rediscovered them. One of the sites explored by the Black Sea map even found evidence that challenges the idea of a single catastrophic flood. By extracting long sediment cores from what used to be the old shoreline, scientists pieced together a nuanced history of sea level change. They concluded that the Black Sea's connection to the Mediterranean happened earlier and more gradually than the Noah's flood hypothesis suggested. It wasn't a one-time tsunami, but a drawn-out transgression of the sea. Nonetheless, for any given village on the coast, drawn out could still mean within a lifetime the water might creep meters higher. The result over a few centuries, from perhaps 5500 BC to 5000 BC, was a shoreline moving dramatically inland. What had been prime real estate became uninhabitable saltwater. An area of about 60,000 square kilometers of land, roughly the size of Lithuania, on the western Black Sea shelf, was lost beneath waves. Those people had to relocate. Their settlements, if not quickly buried by silt, were left on the seabed. Now, stepping back, consider how global this phenomenon was. The Black Sea is one striking example, but at the end of the Ice Age, sea levels rose everywhere by roughly 120 meters. Vast lands flooded on every continent, the Sundaland in Southeast Asia, land now under the South China Sea, the North Sea's Doggerland between Britain and Europe, which we'll touch on later. Coastal areas in India remember myths of drowned cities in Indian epics. The Persian Gulf, once a fertile valley, may be the local of Edenic legends, and so on. It's no wonder that flood stories are nearly universal in ancient cultures. From the Babylonian Utnapishtim to the Hindu Manu to indigenous legends of the Americas, memories of the Great Flood resonate. The Black Sea's underwater cities show that these legends likely carry a kernel of truth. People did witness the seas swallowing their world. Besides the drama, the scientific value of these submerged sites is immense. On land, the remains of a 6,000-year-old village would by now be disturbed by plowing, construction, or erosion. Underwater, sealed beneath layers of sediment, they are pristine. It's as if time froze. Archaeologists can study the layout of these villages. How big were the houses? Did they have a palisade or fence? Were there docks or canoes? Indeed, in a submerged Neolithic site off the coast, there is evidence of what might be an ancient logboat or paddle preserved in anaerobic mud. Furthermore, these finds fill gaps in our knowledge of early trade networks. For instance, some underwater sites have yields of obsidian flakes, volcanic glass used for sharp tools, that came from far away, such as Anatolia, indicating that coastal peoples were connected by trade or movement along the shoreline even 7,000 years ago. The notion of an early maritime trade or exchange along the Black Sea coast is supported by such evidence, challenging the assumption that seafaring trade began only in the Bronze Age with the Phoenicians or Greeks. Here, we have preliterate farming societies already navigating and exchanging goods across waters. The ethical and preservation challenges also come into play. These underwater sites are part of humanity's heritage, but they lie in a difficult-to-protect context. Treasure hunters could loot them, though the depth and anoxic conditions make it tough. Countries bordering the Black Sea must cooperate to research and protect these resources, as submerged sites don't respect modern national boundaries. Encouragingly, projects like Black Sea Map were collaborative, involving Bulgarian, British, and other international experts. They showcase how global teamwork is needed to recover our sunken history. It's a good model for the future of underwater archaeology worldwide. One cannot talk about Black Sea underwater discoveries without also noting how nature's wrath can inadvertently aid archaeology. The low oxygen deep below the Black Sea's surface has preserved not just the prehistoric sites, but also ships from classical antiquity and the Middle Ages in astonishing condition. For example, a 2,000-year-old Roman trading ship found on the seabed had its wooden mast still standing and coils of rope on the deck. If such preservation extends to organic remains in prehistoric layers, who knows what details of daily life might be recoverable? Maybe fragments of woven mats, food remains, even human skeletons in graves. The potential for discovery is huge. By uncovering these drowned worlds, we gain empathy and insight into our ancestors' resilience. The people of those Black Sea villages were among the first European farmers and townsfolk. They built homes, created pottery, raised families, and then had to respond to a slow-motion disaster as the ocean infiltrated their homeland. Did they sense something was changing with the climate? Did they believe the gods were punishing them, or did they pragmatically pack up and move inland? We can only speculate, but seeing their villages on the seafloor reminds us that our planet's history is intertwined with climate change. The end of the Ice Age was a time of dramatic sea rise that reconfigured maps, just as today we worry about rising seas from warming. It's a powerful parallel. Entire civilizations might have been lost to post-glacial sea level rise, not just in the Black Sea, but globally. The Black Sea's underwater cities, then, serve as both archaeological treasure troves and cautionary tales. They whisper to us about a world where the familiar became the foreign sea, where knowledge of prior landscapes had to be forgotten as new shorelines formed. They hint at forgotten global events, massive floods and climatic shifts that our distant forebears endured and perhaps immortalized in legend. As one chief investigator, Professor John Adams, remarked after studying these sites, we are looking at a period in history several thousand years ago when the most dramatic form of history we can experience really did happen. By dramatic form of history, he meant environmental catastrophe, something deeply human to experience and to remember. Now, thanks to science, we are remembering those lost chapters anew. As we've seen, the story of our ancient past is undergoing a radical rewrite. But who is doing the writing? Increasingly, it's not just picks and shovels in the ground, it's satellites, lasers, and artificial intelligence peering beneath jungles and sands. The next frontier of archaeological discovery is high above us in orbit, or flying overhead in planes and drones, and even buried in algorithms that can detect patterns invisible to the human eye. This technology-driven exploration is allowing us to find lost civilizations at a pace and scale unimaginable just a few decades ago. And two of the most exciting regions where this is happening are the vast Amazon rainforest and the remote Arabian deserts. In both places, cutting-edge methods are uncovering hidden structures and settlements, forcing us to think what ancient human societies were capable of. Yet these new discoveries also come with challenges. Ethical questions about how to handle newly accessible sites, how to involve local communities, and how to protect these places in a global context. Let's start with the Amazon, often romantically dubbed the lungs of the earth, a thick green carpet that, for a long time, was assumed to be largely untouched wilderness. There was a persistent notion that the Amazon rainforest was too harsh and infertile to support large human populations or complex societies. Indigenous peoples were thought to have always lived in relatively small, scattered villages with minimal impact. However, indigenous oral histories and early explorers' accounts hinted at something more. There were stories of large cities along the Amazon River, of roads and earthworks deep in the jungle. For years, these were considered exaggerations. After all, by the time scientists visited in the 19th and 20th centuries, they found mostly intact forest and small tribes, with little trace of past cities. But now, thanks to satellite archaeology and especially LiDAR scanning, we know those early tales were true. The Amazon once hosted thriving, populous, interconnected settlements, essentially urban or proto-urban, civilizations that had engineered their environment in sophisticated ways. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, is a laser mapping technology that can penetrate through vegetation canopy to reveal the ground below. Mounted on airplanes or drones, LiDAR has the magical effect of erasing the trees in the digital image, showing us shapes of terrain that are otherwise completely hidden by foliage. In the last few years, archaeologists have been using LiDAR over parts of the Amazon, and the results have been nothing short of revolutionary. In areas of the Bolivian Amazon, the Llanos de Mojos, and Brazil, like Acre State and the Upper Xingu region, LiDAR and satellite analysis have unveiled a network of ancient earthworks, geometric shapes like squares, circles and octagons formed by ditches and mounds, interconnected by causeways that run arrow-straight for miles through the forest. These are not natural features, they are the remnants of roads, canals, fortified villages, and fields constructed by people. Some of these settlements were truly urban in scale. For instance, in 2022, researchers announced the discovery of large sites in Bolivia with central platform mounds and conical pyramids up to 21 meters high. Surrounded by moats and radial roads, these were estimated to be about 1,400 years old and likely supported thousands of inhabitants. In Brazil's Xingu, anthropologist Michael Heckenberger spent decades working with the Quicuro people to excavate and map ancient settlement remains. Uncovered what he calls garden cities, dating about 500 to 1400 AD. These had road grids, plazas, defensive palisade walls, and nearby farms and orchards spread out in a low-density urban pattern. Each such city may have had a few thousand residents, and they were connected to other cities by road networks. forming clusters somewhat like counties or small states. When you put all this data together, a new image of pre-Columbian Amazon emerges, far from being an untouched paradise. It was in many regions a carefully managed landscape, a patchwork of towns, villages, and engineered environments. Ancient Amazonians practiced what's now termed agroforestry, enriching the soil and planting useful trees to create orchards and gardens in the forest. They even altered the very soil. Large swaths of Amazonia have what's called terra preta, or dark earth, a human-made fertile soil produced by mixing charcoal, organic waste, and pottery shards. This was essentially prehistoric soil technology to boost agriculture in a land of otherwise nutrient-poor soils. Over 150,000 square kilometers of Amazonia show evidence of these dark earth soils, indicating intensive habitation and farming. One of the most striking LiDAR findings, highlighted in a 2025 Guardian report, is that by combining datasets, researchers estimate there could be over 10,000, perhaps up to 24,000, undiscovered archaeological sites, earthworks, still hidden under the Amazon canopy. That is mind-boggling. It suggests we've so far only found a fraction of what's out there. It also underscores how important remote sensing is. To survey an area as vast and often inaccessible as the Amazon on foot would take centuries. But with satellites and AI analysis of imagery, we can start to identify promising areas much faster. Indeed, artificial intelligence is being employed to sift through satellite images and LiDAR scans. Machine learning. Algorithms can be trained to recognize the subtle linear patterns of ancient roads or the rectangular outlines of a buried foundation. One project led by Brazilian and international scientists uses AI to map geoglyphs, large geometric earthworks, in Acre State. They fed the algorithm with examples of known geoglyphs, and it scanned huge image sets to flag similar shapes, leading to dozens of new finds. Another effort, Global Explorer, spearheaded by space archaeologist Sarah Parcak, launched a crowdsourcing platform where volunteers examined high-resolution satellite photos of initially Peru to tag potential archaeological sites. A similar approach could be applied in Amazon countries to protect sites from looting or deforestation by identifying them early. In fact, given the rapid rate of Amazon deforestation, archaeologists are in a race. Trees have preserved these sites by hiding them, but when bulldozers clear forest for ranches, sites can be damaged before anyone even notices them. Satellite monitoring can help spot such threats and prompt rescue excavations. The discoveries in Amazonia are rewriting the past of the Americas. They show that the idea of pristine wilderness is partly a colonial myth. In 1492, the Americas were teeming with tens of millions of people, and in Amazonia, large portions of the forest were actually a cultivated landscape, more akin to a vast garden or series of managed parks. The collapse of those societies, mostly due to disease and conquest after European contact, and the regrowth of jungle over their works is what fooled outsiders into thinking the jungle was virgin. Now we're restoring the memory of those lost cities. And interestingly, this knowledge has contemporary value. The sustainable techniques of ancient Amazonians, like terra preta, mixed crop agroforestry, fish weirs in seasonally flooded areas, could inspire more sustainable practices today. It's like the ancestors left behind an instruction manual in the dirt, if we care to read it. Switching focus to the Arabian deserts, the scene is different in climate, but similar in the excitement of new finds. The Arabian Peninsula, especially the vast stretches of Saudi Arabia, was long thought to have only sparse nomadic populations in deep prehistory. Outside of famous sites like the Nabatean city of Madain Saleh or the rock art of Hale, much of the desert was archaeologically blank on maps. But technology changed that. Starting around the 1970s and accelerating recently, aerial and satellite surveys began to spot thousands of strange structures on the Arabian landscape. Stone alignments, shapes and enclosures visible from above but almost imperceptible on the ground. Back then, researchers had little idea what they were. Local Bedouin often called them works of the old men, attributing them to ancestors or spirits. One category of these structures are now called desert kites, long stone walls converging into enclosures, which we now know were ancient mass hunting traps for gazelles and other game, common in Syria, Jordan, and Saudi. Another category, discovered especially in northwestern Saudi Arabia, the Khaybar region and Al-Ula, are the so-called gates, or mustatils. Mustatil means rectangle in Arabic, and that's what they are. Low stone wall rectangles, often very large, hundreds of meters long, with a distinctive head, thicker end, and base, entrance end. When seen from satellite images, they look like giant oblong courtyards, or, as the name gate suggests, like bar gates laid flat on the ground. Saudi and international archaeologists launched a major project to document these. They used a combination of satellite remote sensing and helicopter aerial surveys to systematically map them. The results were astonishing. Over 1,000 mustatils have been recorded, spread across an area of about 200,000 square kilometers of desert. Some are relatively small, but many are enormous, up to 600 meters long. And crucially, through excavations, scientists have dated them to around 7,000 years ago, circa 5300, 5000 BC. That means these structures predate Stonehenge by about 2 millennia, and the Egyptian pyramids by over 3,000 years. What were they for? Excavations at a few mustatils revealed curious clues. Inside the rubble of the head, end of one, researchers found a cache of cattle horns and skulls, as well as remains of sheep, goat, and gazelle. There were no signs of daily domestic activity, no hearths, no common trash, or habitation debris. This strongly suggests a ritual purpose. The interpretation put forward is that these were ceremonial enclosures where pastoralist communities gathered to offer animal sacrifices, likely to some deity or totem. In essence, a prehistoric cattle cult site. If that's true, it's globally significant. It indicates that around 7,000 years ago, the people of Arabia, who were just transitioning from hunter-gatherers to herders, had a widespread shared religion or ritual practice. They built monumental rectangular shrines across a huge region, from parts of southern Jordan through northwest Saudi, implying a cultural unity. Imagine the coordination, or at least the shared tradition, needed to plan similar structures across hundreds of miles. Social organization was definitely present. Constructing a mustatil took a lot of labor. One estimate is at least 10,000 hours of work for an Averrogian. That means tribes or clans had to come together, cooperate, and commit to a cause beyond everyday survival. The mustatils truly show the creation of a monumental landscape, says archaeologist Hugh Grucut, and they prove that this supposedly empty desert was once a region of remarkable human cultural development. Where today there is arid basalt barrens, 7,000 years ago it was more fertile savanna, we know from climate data and rock art with cattle images. The mustatil builders likely were pastoralists in a greener landscape, congregating at these ritual centers. Besides mustatils, satellite imagery in Arabia has uncovered ancient wells and caravan stations, lost cities on old trade routes, and enigmatic stone tombs and cairns forming geometric patterns. In Saudi's southwestern deserts and in Yemen, Oman, for instance, satellite mapping is identifying long lines of tombs, like funerary avenues, and previously unknown prehistoric towns. One dramatic example, using Google Earth, researchers identified the outline of a buried city in the sands of Oman, which some have linked to the fabled city of Ubar, also known as Iram of the Pillars in the Quran. That turned out to be an ancient frankincense trading outpost. Another case. High-resolution satellite images helped locate camel caravan routes and fortresses in the empty quarter desert. Artificial intelligence can assist here too, training an algorithm to scan vast desert expanses for the circular shadows of burial mounds or the linear alignments of walls. This is happening now. It's essentially augmenting human vision to comb through huge datasets far faster than any person could. The result is an explosion of potential site leads. In Saudi Arabia, archaeologists have gone from knowing of a few hundred pre-Islamic sites to cataloguing several thousand in just a few years of remote sensing work. Each new site offers a piece of the puzzle of Arabia's human past, which includes things like the transition from hunting to herding, the rise of early kingdoms involved in incense trade, or the spread of alphabetic writing. Early Semitic inscriptions have indeed been found carved on remote rocks, often first spotted via satellite coordinates. However, with these advances come new challenges. One is simply keeping up, having the resources, funding, and people to ground truth the flood of discoveries. It's one thing for an algorithm to flag 100 potential mustatils. It's another to send field teams out to verify each on the ground, especially in harsh or remote terrain. There's also the issue of preservation. When previously unknown sites are revealed, they can become vulnerable to looters or unintentional damage. For instance, if a site lies along a path of a planned development, say a new highway or a NEOM megacity project in Saudi, will authorities take measures to preserve it once it's been spotted from space? Publicizing finds is a double-edged sword. It raises awareness but can also draw treasure hunters. Another challenge is ethical collaboration, especially notable in places like the Amazon. Many areas of the Amazon with lost earthworks are today home to indigenous communities. While some of those communities are descendants of the very people who built the earthworks and might even know of them through oral tradition, others moved in later. Researchers must navigate working in others' backyard with respect and partnership. Encouragingly, many Amazonian archaeological projects actively involve local indigenous people. For example, the Kwikoro in Xingu worked hand-in-hand with Heckenberger to map their ancestral sites, blending scientific and traditional knowledge. Similarly, in the Middle East, international teams working with local governments is key. Saudi Arabia, for one, has in recent years opened up much more to archaeological research and is keen on showcasing its heritage for tourism and national pride. Projects like the Alula and NEOM heritage surveys bring in experts from around the globe and are fairly well supported. But in some regions, political instability can halt exploration. Think of war-torn areas or places where access is restricted. As a global community, archaeologists must sometimes make tough choices about when to publish data, like exact coordinates of a fragile site, versus when to hold back to protect it. Global collaboration is absolutely essential when it comes to these new frontiers. The skills required span multiple disciplines: satellite imaging specialists, AI experts, climate scientists to understand past landscapes, biologists to analyze ancient pollen or fauna remains, and of course, archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists. No one country or university has all this expertise, so pooling knowledge internationally yields the best results. The Black Sea project was a great example. It had UK, Bulgarian, American, and other researchers working together on ships with advanced equipment. In the Amazon, collaborations between South American universities and European institutions and funding from global sources have propelled LiDAR research. This is heartening because the story of humanity's past truly belongs to all of us. It's a shared heritage that transcends borders. Another dimension of the ethical challenge is deciding how to preserve and present these discoveries. Should we, for instance, attempt to physically excavate remote sites? Or is it better to use non-invasive techniques and leave them untouched? In the Amazon, fully excavating a large city would mean cutting down a lot of forest, something nobody wants to do given environmental concerns. So there's a balance. Use LiDAR to understand and perhaps do targeted small digs to date and sample, but otherwise let the jungle continue its slow stewardship. In Arabia, many mustatals are in areas slated for development. Perhaps some can be incorporated into parks or protected zones. Then there's the aspect of engaging the public, the wide audience, in this new narrative. The story of lost Amazonian cities and Arabian prehistoric monuments is thrilling and captures imagination, much like the old legends of El Dorado or Arabian lost cities did. But it must be communicated without sensationalism or distortion. We have to avoid falling into new, lost race myths or hyperbole. Their reality is exciting enough. We don't need aliens or Atlantis to spice it up. These were real cultures, often instances of people still around, who achieved remarkable things with ingenuity and communal effort. As we incorporate AI and satellites, one might ask, are we at risk of replacing the romance of exploration with cold data? On the contrary, these technologies are simply tools, very powerful ones, that extend human senses. They allow us to virtually peel back jungle, see under sand, or scan the ocean floor. In doing so, they actually add to the romance by revealing more than we dreamed. They also democratize discovery. A student on a laptop analyzing satellite data can make a find as significant as an old-school archaeologist hacking through vines with a machete. Some of the mustatils, for example, were first noticed by hobbyists scanning Google Earth. We live in a time when anyone with an internet connection can potentially contribute to finding our hidden heritage. How amazing is that? All these breakthroughs feed into a larger theme. The past is not static. It is continually being rewritten. Our historical narratives are drafts awaiting revisions as new evidence comes in. 20 years ago, who could have imagined we'd be talking about 10,000-year-old temples in Turkey, or the possibility of complex societies in the Ice Age Beringia, or city-like networks in the Amazon? Each discovery is like adding a new chapter, or at least a new footnote that can alter the storyline. It's a very exciting time to be someone interested in history or archaeology, because technology is accelerating the rate of discovery exponentially. Yet, we must remain thoughtful. Rewriting the past isn't about sensationally overturning everything that came before. It's about deepening and enriching our understanding. It's also about inclusion, acknowledging achievements of non-Western or previously marginalized cultures. Ancient advanced society is not synonymous with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China anymore. We now also recognize the advanced planning of Amazonians, the spiritual monument builders of Anatolia, the maritime pioneers of the Pacific coasts, the engineers of Angkor's waterways, and so on. Our human story is far more globally interconnected and inventive than older narratives admitted. In drawing this grand exploration to a close, what overarching lesson can we glean? For one, humility. Time and again, we've underestimated our ancestors, and time and again, they've proven more impressive. Humans 10,000 years ago were as intelligent and resourceful as we are today. Given the right conditions and knowledge, they accomplished feats that make us marvel. We should also feel a sense of connection. These stories, whether of a community fleeing a rising sea or builders raising stones to the sky, resonate with experiences we can understand. They were different in their world, but they were human, creative, spiritual, problem-solving, social. Finally, there is a sense of wonder and anticipation. Standing at this point in 2025, with satellites overhead and submersibles at the ready, we realize that our journey into ancient history has only just begun. There are oceans of secrets, literally in some cases, left to find. Perhaps the next big discovery will be a submerged city off the coast of India, or a network of settlements under the Sahara sands revealed by ground-penetrating radar, or an Ice Age ritual, cave full of carvings in now-melting Arctic permafrost. Who knows? The one certainty is that the past isn't done surprising us. Each discovery, each breakthrough is not merely about the past, it's about us. It enriches our story, giving us a deeper sense of where we come from and what our species has achieved. It challenges us to think what we're capable of and how we adapt to change. And it serves as a reminder that knowledge is never complete. We must always be ready to learn more, or rather, to unlearn and learn again. In the spirit of the great unlearning, we conclude with this thought. The true wonders of our past era not just found, they are being constantly redefined. With each new discovery, we peel back another layer of the human saga, and what we find is more awe-inspiring than any myth. Our ancestors left us clues in stones, in bones, in sunken ruins, and hidden earthworks. We are fortunate to live in a time when we can finally read many of those clues. The story they tell is one of ingenuity, resilience, and creativity, stretching back further and in more diverse forms than we ever imagined. Indeed, the journey of uncovering our ancient history has only just begun, and what a magnificent journey it promises to be.